Focus is a word we hear a lot, sometimes maybe too much. Seems especially prevalent this time of year. We hear athletes talk about staying focused on the game they're about to play rather than looking forward to the playoff game they hope to play. Actors expecting awards often speak about staying focused on the particular role into which they have been cast. Many of us discuss the difficulty we are having staying focused on the task at hand in the face of the ceaseless onslaught of life's interruptions. The applicable dictionary definition of focus is a central point, a center of activity, action, or attention. Currently, I would imagine even in your minds right this minute, I suspect that many of you are concentrating on the large-scale effort on staying focused on the many things that you want to do in preparation for the coming celebration of Christmas. We all likely realize at this point that there are many smaller foci in and among the larger ones, and that there is some overarching central point of focus in our lives. This morning, I believe that we get a feel for how John the Baptist was sorting out the points of focus in his life. The evangelist, St. John, the writer of the Gospel, tells us about this, what is known as the last testimony of John the Baptist. John the Baptist, you heard, was confronted with a stumbling block that has humbled many prophets, apostles, disciples, priests, politicians. It's one of those ruination factors for all of us. It's that stumbling block of pride, of self-absorption. We could all sit here right now and name a list that would take us probably to Darlington, of folks that have fallen into that self-absorption. But John the Baptist realizes that there is something more important than himself. In his words, it is the one who is coming after me. He demonstrates that he not only knows the message that he has been called to deliver, but that he can live the message. This is no do as I say, not as I do conundrum for John the Baptist. Anyone that has been a parent or any sort of leader can identify with that sort of subtle struggle of focus, that idea of identity and the focus of who is a front person and who is to come. John the Baptist has moved the place of his baptizing ministry to another place where there's more water. I would imagine by this time the water where he had been is rather muddied up by the throng coming to him, and they continue to come. They come to him repenting of their sins. They come to him seeking baptism. We heard that John the Baptist is being confronted by priests and Levites sent by the Jews at Jerusalem who were wondering about these great crowds. That's the source of the wonder. What is it, all these crowds coming down to the river? And they ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "Well, I tell you who I'm not. I'm not the Messiah. I'm not Elijah. I'm not a prophet." "Are you a prophet?" they asked him. He answered, No. And then they said to him, Well, who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? He said, not even in his own words, quoting Isaiah, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. It's hard to say less about yourself than that. John the Baptist makes it perfectly clear that his own function, perfectly clear, that his own function is subordinate to that of Jesus. He reveals that God's message is more than words to him, though. God's grace, you see, has already begun to transform his heart. He not only understands that his ministry is nothing without Jesus, he gracefully accepts that fact. He is merely the best man. Jesus is the bridegroom. Jesus has come for his bride Israel. The one that was the voice is now the one whose joy is fulfilled in hearing the voice of Jesus. Would that we could more often find that same joy. Sometimes when we begin to focus on the one who comes, our pride stands in the way, and we start to think about how we might look as a follower. Sometimes even the ministries we take on become more about ourselves than about Jesus. Sometimes we think the prize is ours to be won, and we're more pleased with the sound of our own voices than we are interested in listening for the voice of the true bridegroom. It is easy for us to imagine a less self-effacing approach to one's ministry than what John embodies. In other words, he has an entirely self-effacing ministry and call. In his situation, in John the Baptist's situation, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we might almost hear ourselves saying, if we were standing right there in his sandals, right there on the Jordan River, I was here first. The people have repented because of my work. I got this whole thing started, and now someone wants to horn his way in and tries to grab all the credit. No such thing with John the Baptist. He is a model of the church's ministry. His mind is focused on the fact that Jesus is Israel's Messiah, the coming King, and he spends his time pointing to Jesus. The writer of this gospel, John the Evangelist, also intends for us to see. You know how John does in his gospel. He develops the characters along and along, and he does such a marvelous job with doing that. And he wants us to see in the different characters of the story of Jesus that they must learn, in the words of C.S. Lewis, they must learn to play the great parts without pride and the small parts without shame. Peter is reminded at the end of the gospel that what counts is not comparing yourself with other people and seeing whether your status is higher or lower than theirs, but the idea is simply to follow Jesus. As is obvious to you by our shift in liturgical color, we've taken a small step away from the theme of preparation. I guess it's a pretty small step. We've got 3 different colors, so we're still somewhat in the theme of preparation, but we also are taking and allowing us a sense a heightened sense of anticipation for what is to come. On this Gaudete, this Rose Rejoicing Sunday, we share the joy of anticipation. Of course, we anticipate the joys of the celebration of the babe in the manger, little time off of work, and feasting with family and friends. And perhaps this year again, we might try to adjust our focus a little more towards an experience that's not quite so fleeting as those things, where a more fulfilling joy can be known. As John the Baptist has demonstrated, when we turn our focus away from ourselves, away from our desires, away from our drives and our pride, and retain our focus on Christ, a deep and fulfilling joy and peace is discovered. When Christ is our focus, we are freed. We're freed from many of the common frustrations and restless strivings that are driven by our pride. John the Baptist, through the grace of God, could focus on the fact he had this part. He could focus on the fact that God is God and that he was not. In Jesus, he knew he'd come up against something that in every respect was immeasurably superior to himself. And unless we see that too, we see that we've come up in God, that we've come up against something immeasurably superior than we are, then we have no real way. There's very little in comparison between us and God, is what I'm trying to say. And if we can't see that huge difference between God and us, then we really don't know God at all. John the Baptist understood this. He knew what his purpose was, and he knew why he was created. And you know, his purpose and why he was created is no different than ours: to know and to love God. When Christ is the center of our activity, we as individual followers and the church, when he's the center of that activity, we are directing others to the joy of life with one who is faithful, steadfast, and true. How full our church calendar is during Advent. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And it can be a rich and rewarding experience for us. I believe the Wednesday nights have been such a thing. But over it all, over all these Advent experiences, over every song, every service of worship, concert, parade, party, gift, act of charity, let the church first say, we are not the bridegroom, but are friends of the bridegroom. Christ is the one who has come, and we rejoice greatly at his voice. When our focus is on the true Messiah who has come, we no longer have to search for meaning or attempt to promote our own worth. John the Baptist leaves us a very, very simple formula for Christ coming into our lives. You know what it is. John the Baptist says about Jesus, he must increase, but I must decrease. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.